Welcome to True Crime Talks, where we unravel the darkest secrets hiding behind the brightest facades. Today we dive into the chilling story of a wife's secret romance with a neighbor's son, a tale of betrayal, passion, and murder in the heart of a quiet, suburban town. The small, picturesque town of Willow Creek was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone. Nestled between rolling hills and dense forests, it was a community where life moved at a slower pace and neighbors looked out for one another. At the heart of this tranquil town was the Harper family, who appeared to be the embodiment of perfection. Jennifer Harper, the devoted wife and mother, was admired for her warmth and charm. She was the kind of woman who always had a smile on her face and a kind word for everyone she met. Her husband James was a successful real estate agent, known for his sharp business acumen and dedication to his family. Together they had 2 children, Emily and Jake, who were well behaved and excelled in school. From the outside, the Harpers were the picture of happiness and stability. Next door lived the Carters, a quieter family who kept mostly to themselves. The Carters had a teenage son named Ronald, who was shy but polite. He was often seen mowing the lawn or helping his elderly father with chores around the house. Ronald was a good kid, though he didn't have many friends. He spent most of his time alone, lost in his thoughts or tinkering with gadgets in his room. To the outside world, the Harpers and the Carters were just friendly neighbors, exchanging pleasantries and occasional baked goods. There was nothing unusual about their relationship, or so it seemed. But beneath the surface, a dangerous secret was brewing. Jennifer, though adored by her community, had begun to feel a growing sense of loneliness. James's long work hours and frequent business trips left her feeling neglected and unappreciated. She tried to fill the void by throwing herself into her children's lives and volunteering at the local community center, but it wasn't enough. She craved connection, someone who would see her not just as a wife and mother, but as a woman with her own desires and dreams. Ronald, on the other hand, was at an age where he was beginning to explore his own identity. He was awkward and unsure of himself, but he found solace in Jennifer's kindness. She was the only adult who seemed to truly listen to him, who made him feel seen and valued. What started as innocent conversations over the fence soon turned into something more. Jennifer found herself drawn to Ronald's youthful energy and admiration, while Ronald was captivated by Jennifer's attention, and their relationship crossed a line, evolving into a secret romance that neither of them could resist. They began meeting in secret, stealing moments whenever they could. Jennifer would slip out of the house late at night, claiming she was going for a walk, while Ronald would sneak out of his bedroom window to meet her. Their affair was a dangerous game, one that could destroy everything they held dear. But in the heat of the moment, they convinced themselves that no one would ever find out. They were careful, or so they thought, to keep their relationship hidden from prying eyes. The affair gave Jennifer a sense of excitement and fulfillment that had been missing from her life for years. For Ronald, it was a thrilling escape from the monotony of his teenage existence. But as the relationship deepened, so did the risks. Jennifer's guilt began to weigh on her, and Ronald started to feel the pressure of keeping such a monumental secret. They were trapped in a web of desire and deception, unaware of the storm that was about to hit. The perfect facade of their lives was beginning to crack, and it wouldn't be long before the truth came crashing down. As the months passed, subtle changes in Jennifer's behavior began to raise eyebrows, though no one could quite put their finger on what was wrong. She had always been the epitome of grace and composure, but now there was a restlessness about her. She became more distant from James, often lost in thought or snapping at him over trivial matters. Her once immaculate house began to show signs of neglect. Dishes piled up in the sink, laundry left unfolded, and the garden she had once tended with such care now overgrown with weeds. James, though preoccupied with his work, couldn't ignore the growing tension in their home. He noticed how Jennifer's phone was always face down, how she jumped at the sound of a text message, and how she would disappear for hours without explanation. When he asked her where she had been, she would offer vague answers or change the subject altogether. James tried to convince himself that it was just a phase, that Jennifer was stressed or going through something she didn't want to talk about. but deep down he couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. He began to pay closer attention to her movements, noticing the way she would linger by the window, her eyes darting toward the Carter house next door. He even caught her once, standing in the backyard late at night, staring into the darkness, as if waiting for someone. When he asked her what she was doing, she brushed it off, saying she couldn't sleep. But James wasn't entirely convinced. Meanwhile, Ronald's parents were growing increasingly concerned about their son. He had always been a quiet boy, but now he seemed almost unreachable. He spent less time with his friends and more time locked in his room, emerging only for meals or to help with chores. His grades, once solid, began to slip, and his teachers noted a lack of focus in class. His mother tried to talk to him, asking if something was wrong, but Ronald would only shrug and mutter, "It's nothing." His father, a stern man who believed in tough love, dismissed it as typical teenage behavior, but his mother couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply troubling her son. Ronald's guilt was eating him alive. He knew what he was doing was wrong, but he couldn't bring himself to end the affair. Jennifer made him feel special in a way no one else ever had, and he was terrified of losing that connection. But the weight of their secret was becoming unbearable. He started having nightmares, waking up in a cold sweat, convinced that someone had discovered the truth. He became paranoid, jumping at every sound and avoiding eye contact with his parents. He even stopped going to the Harper's house altogether, afraid that James might suspect something. The affair was taking its toll on both households, but neither Jennifer nor Ronald could bring themselves to end it. They were trapped in a dangerous cycle of desire and guilt, each clinging to the other for comfort, even as their lives began to unravel around them. Jennifer's marriage was crumbling, and Ronald's relationship with his family was strained to the breaking point. Yet they continued to meet in secret, stealing moments of passion and solace, unaware of the storm that was about to hit. The cracks in their carefully constructed lives were growing wider, and it wouldn't be long before everything came crashing down. The breaking point came on a cool autumn evening, when the air was crisp and the leaves had begun to turn shades of gold and red. James had been working late, as usual, but decided to leave the office early to surprise Jennifer with dinner. He stopped by her favorite Italian restaurant, picked up a bottle of wine, and headed home, imagining the look of delight on her face when he walked through the door. But what he found instead was a scene that would shatter his world forever. As James approached the house, he noticed the living room curtains were slightly open, casting a faint glow onto the front lawn. He could hear muffled voices inside, though he couldn't make out what they were saying. Assuming it was the TV, he unlocked the door and stepped inside, calling out Jennifer's name. The voices stopped abruptly, and for a moment, the house was eerily silent. Then, as James rounded the corner into the living room, he froze. There, on the couch, was Jennifer, her face flushed and her hair disheveled. Beside her was Ronald, his shirt untucked and his expression a mixture of shock and fear. The realization hit James like a punch to the gut. His wife, the woman he had loved and trusted for over a decade, was having an affair with their teenage neighbor. The room seemed to spin as rage and betrayal surged through him. Jennifer tried to speak, to explain, but James wasn't listening. He lunged at Ronald, grabbing him by the collar and shouting accusations. Ronald, terrified and ashamed, managed to break free and bolted out the door, leaving Jennifer to face James's wrath alone. The argument that followed was explosive. Jennifer tried to defend herself, saying she had been lonely, that James had neglected her for years, but her words only fueled his anger. He accused her of betraying their family, of destroying everything they had built together. The fight escalated, with both of them saying things they would later regret. In a moment of blind rage, James grabbed a heavy vase from the mantelpiece and swung it at Jennifer. The blow struck her temple and she crumpled to the floor, unconscious. For a moment, James stood there, staring at Jennifer's lifeless body, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The reality of what he had done began to sink in, and panic set in. He checked for a pulse, but there was none. Jennifer was gone. Desperate to cover his tracks, James cleaned the scene as best as he could, wiping away any evidence of the struggle. He wrapped Jennifer's body in a blanket and carried her out to the woods behind their house. The ground was soft from recent rain, making it easier to dig a shallow grave. As he buried her, his mind raced with thoughts of how to explain her disappearance. By the time he returned to the house, it was late and the neighborhood was quiet. James took a shower, scrubbing away any traces of dirt or blood, and tried to compose himself. He knew he had to act quickly to create an alibi. He called Jennifer's best friend, pretending to be worried because Jennifer hadn't come home. He even drove around the neighborhood, asking neighbors if they had seen her. To the outside world, Jennifer had simply vanished, and James was the distraught husband desperate to find his wife. But inside, he was a man consumed by guilt and fear, knowing that his life would never be the same. Jennifer's disappearance sent shockwaves through the tight-knit community of Willow Creek. The news spread quickly, and soon the entire town was abuzz with speculation. How could someone as beloved and visible as Jennifer simply vanish without a trace? The police launched an investigation, interviewing friends, family, and neighbors, but with no body and no witnesses, the case quickly grew cold. James played the role of the grieving husband perfectly, his performance so convincing that even those closest to him believed his story. He organized search parties, plastered the town with missing person posters, and gave tearful interviews pleading for Jennifer's safe return. But behind closed doors, he was a man on edge, constantly looking over his shoulder and jumping at every knock on the door. The police initially treated Jennifer's disappearance as a missing person case, but as days turned into weeks with no leads, they began to suspect foul play. James became a person of interest, though there was no concrete evidence linking him to Jennifer's disappearance. Detectives combed through the Harper's home, searching for any clues that might shed light on what had happened. They found nothing out of the ordinary, but something about James's demeanor struck them as off. He was too calm, too composed, as if he were following a script. Still, without proof, there was little they could do. Meanwhile, Ronald was falling apart. The guilt of what had happened that night was eating him alive. He had witnessed James burying Jennifer's body, but was too terrified to come forward. The weight of the secret was crushing him, and he began to withdraw even further from the world. His parents, already concerned about his recent behavior, grew increasingly worried. They tried to talk to him, to get him to open up, but Ronald refused to say a word. He stopped eating, stopped sleeping, and spent most of his time locked in his room staring at the walls. His mother begged him to see a therapist, but Ronald refused, convinced that nothing could help him. Then a breakthrough came. A hiker exploring the woods behind the Harper house stumbled upon a shallow grave. The police were called to the scene, and it didn't take long for them to identify the body as Jennifer's. The discovery reignited the investigation, and the police turned their attention to James. Despite his carefully constructed alibi, cracks began to show. Detectives noticed inconsistencies in his story, and his behavior during interviews became increasingly defensive. They also discovered that Jennifer had been having an affair, though they didn't yet know with whom. The revelation stunned the community, but it also provided a motive. As the investigation deepened, the police began to piece together the events leading up to Jennifer's death. They interviewed Ronald's parents, who mentioned their son's recent strange behavior. When questioned, Ronald initially denied knowing anything, but the pressure was too much. He finally broke down and confessed to the affair, though he still couldn't bring himself to reveal what he had seen that night. The police now had a clear suspect in James, but they needed more evidence to build a case. The net was closing in, and it was only a matter of time before the truth came to light. The trial of James Harper was the most sensational event Willow Creek had ever seen. The courtroom was packed with townspeople, reporters, and curious onlookers, all eager to hear the details of the case that had gripped their community. James sat at the defense table, his face a mask of stoic calm, though those who knew him could see the cracks in his facade. The prosecution painted a damning picture of a man driven to violence by betrayal, presenting evidence of Jennifer's affair and James's growing resentment. They argued that James had killed Jennifer in a fit of rage, then tried to cover up his crime by burying her body in the woods. The defense, on the other hand, claimed it was a crime of passion, an impulsive act committed in the heat of the moment. They portrayed James as a devoted husband pushed to the brink by Jennifer's infidelity. The trial took a dramatic turn when Ronald was called to the stand. He had been reluctant to testify, but the weight of his guilt had become unbearable. As he took the oath, his hands trembled and his voice wavered. The courtroom fell silent as he began to recount the events of that fateful night. He spoke of the affair, of the secret meetings and stolen moments, and of the night he had returned to the Harper house after fleeing in fear. He described how he had seen James burying Jennifer's body, how he had wanted to come forward but was too scared. His testimony was raw and emotional, and by the time he finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the courtroom. James's defense team tried to discredit Ronald, suggesting that he was lying to cover up his own role in Jennifer's death. But the damage had been done. Ronald's confession, combined with the physical evidence and James's suspicious behavior, was enough to convince the jury of his guilt. After hours of deliberation, they returned with a verdict: guilty of second-degree murder. James showed no emotion as the judge sentenced him to life in prison. But as he was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs, the weight of his actions seemed to finally hit him. His shoulders slumped and his head bowed, as if the reality of his new life was beginning to sink in. The case left Willow Creek forever changed. The Harpers' perfect facade had crumbled, exposing the dark secrets that had festered beneath. Jennifer's death was a tragedy, but it also served as a stark reminder that even the most idyllic lives can hide the darkest truths. Ronald, though not charged, carried the guilt of his actions for the rest of his life. He moved away from Willow Creek shortly after the trial, hoping to start over somewhere new, but the memories of what had happened haunted him wherever he went. In the end, the story of Jennifer, James, and Ronald became a cautionary tale, a reminder of the dangers of secrets and lies. It was a story of love and betrayal, of passion and violence, and of the devastating consequences that can arise when those lines are crossed. The town of Willow Creek would never forget the Harpers, not just for the tragedy that had unfolded, but for the lessons it had taught them about the fragility of human relationships and the importance of facing the truth, no matter how painful it might be.